idea of a doublet. Friedman talks about this in his book. All right, what is a doublet?
Same story.
Two shots.
Same story, two different.
It's the same story two different times. And in general, when you have a story in the Torah that appears twice, what are the possible reasons why it's there a second time?
Different authors.
Could be that it's a different author. Great.
Emphasis.
Could be for emphasis.
Misprint.
Could you imagine having to do a recall of all the Bibles because it was a
different
misprint?
interpretation.
Could be a different
Coming
interpretation.
from the two different
Perspectives.
Israel and Judah.
Good. It could be coming from two different kingdoms. It could also be that there's one voice that's trying to win out over the other. So it could be corrective, right? Well, you just heard from that guy. Now I want to correct you and reorient you. So what I want to look at for you, I was going to do the binding of Isaac, but I'll wait until the rest of the group gets back. I want to look at the story of Abraham going to Egypt. Okay? Jerry, would you mind grabbing a few more machine, please? There are two different stories of Abraham going to Egypt. And in general, why do people go to Egypt?
To see, yeah.
To see the pharaohs.
To see the pyramids.
To see the pyramids. Okay, all right. You guys are my comic relief. You're my historian.
For food.
Stan, why do people go to Egypt?
Because there's famine.
Usually because there's famine. Why would you go to Egypt in a famine?
Because they don't depend on rain.
That's right. They don't depend on rain primarily because of the Nile. They're in denial.
I know which side are you on?
What page are we on?
We are in the Red Chumash on page 69.
So you can't find it.
There's another one here. There's a couple on the table. If anyone-
Anybody needs another one?
Yeah.
We got, here, we got another one there. Oh, yeah. Any more
Page
needed?
69. 69.
You memorized it.
You memorize it.
God's election of Abraham.
69.
It's going to be certified in the Senate.
59 or 60?
69.
What's the majority?
What's that?
The
Too many
Alabama
votes.
Senate certified it.
Yes,
That's okay.
yeah. He complained because there were too many votes.
Too many votes?
Voters.
Yeah, too many voters. It was, yeah.
Oh, you're talking about Ray Moore?
Roy Moore.
Roy Moore, I mean?
Too many
voters.
How
Yeah.
good if
There
people
must
voted.
there must have been something fishy because too many people voted.
Actually, he didn't like who voted.
Right.
Yeah, the color of the people who voted is what he didn't
And
like.
the, and the
So guys, this is all being recorded and it's being put on YouTube. I kind of point that out.
Falls under the concept of vote early enough.
Consider this to be a polygraph.
I'm
Okay?
just saying.
All right. So if you're in the sources book, in the sources revealed, we're on page 50. Okay.
in here.
May I have a reader, please? Sandy?
Sure.
All right.
In the sources or?
No, it doesn't matter. It's the same text.
Okay, well I can read it from,
All right. We're in chapter 12.
okay.
Okay. This is the commissioning scene of Abraham. I'm not so interested in the commissioning part, but we'll just read it quickly just to have set the stage.
The first 75 years of Abraham's life are passed
That's
over.
the commentary. Go
Oh,
above.
I
Chapter
see.
12.
Okay, God, there you go. God by giving
No,
Adam-
up above.
Lord
Up above. First line.
The Lord said to Abram, "Go forth," all the way at the top.
page.
And then
We're right next to the big number 12.
Number 1.
Oh, here.
It was Abraham, yeah.
No, up here. No, the Lord.
Abram.
Text.
The Lord said.
That's it.
And then it goes to the next
And then it goes to
page.
the
And then it
next
goes to the
page.
next page. That's what's.
Yeah, the whole right to left thing is very confusing. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
right. The Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be blessed. You shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." Abram went forth as the Lord had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the wealth that he had amassed, and the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem, at the terebinth of Moreh. The Canaanites were then in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will assign this land to your offspring. And he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and En I on the east. Aye. That's a doublet. On the east, and he built there an altar to the Lord and invoked the Lord by name. Then Abram journeyed by the stages toward the Negev. There was a famine in the land.
Okay, let's pause right there.
Okay.
Okay. So, first of all, I'm hoping that as we start reading these texts more and more, you're going to start doing a few things, which is to look for clues about who the author might be. So, according to this story, who do you think the author is? Why do you think it's J? Right, we're calling God Adonai. That's an important distinction. Right? If you have your Sources Revealed book for a second, you'll notice very clearly that chapter 12 on page 50 happens to be in the light green, which is for J. But what you'll also notice is that verses 4b through 5 are in a different color, with a little bit of redaction. Meaning, what color is the blue?
P.
It's P. One of the things we want to ask ourselves is, why would the redactor put language of P into J? Okay? So it just so happens that there's a lovely note at the bottom.
What's the insert? Is there a story through Rabbi?
Oh, and Abram was 75 years old when he went out from Haran, and Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's sons, all their property that they had accumulated in persons they had gotten in Haran, and they went down to the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. Why is it characteristic of P?
How old was Abraham?
75?
75.
The rest of it I'm not so sure.
Okay. So if you look at the bottom, you'll note that there is a little bit of a notation where it says Abram's name is changed to Abraham only in P, right? Which is going to happen later in the story in Genesis 17. And Sarai's name is changed to Sarah. There's no mention of these changes of names in J or E. It may be the reference to it was eliminated by the redactor because it was particularly blatant duplication, or more probably the redactor changed the names Abraham and Sarah to Abraham and Sarai wherever they occurred in J and E prior to Genesis 17. What happens in Genesis 17? Why do they get the name change?
There's the covenant.
There's a covenant. Who likes covenants? The priests like covenants. And in particular, what is the covenant that the priests are wanting to highlight in this story connected to Abraham?
Circumcision.
No, not yet.
The land of
The land of Canaan. The land of Canaan. So the priestly redactors, or the redactor plus the priest, or the priestly author, however you want to call it, he wants to make sure that you know that in Abraham's leaving his homeland, which is not Canaan, and going to a new land that is promised to him, they want to make sure that you, the reader, know what that land is.
But is there anything that it's because it rhymes with Canaan, from Haran to Haran, or something? Canaan?
I don't think it's poetic. No. But I like your thinking. All right? They want to make sure that they've established along the way that Abraham has a connection to Canaan. What's Canaan? That's the promised land.
That's where the Judea-Samaria is.
Right. So this is very intentional. We're learning about a new character who's going to essentially be the character of the book of Genesis. Right? Everything is all about Abraham.
And
Right,
Lot
yeah.
was not mentioned in the other one, but it's brought up here. Is there a connection with Lot?
Yes. Well, in this case, Lot is the one who leaves him. But what does it tell us about Lot?
That he was a young boy? Or
That's
was it
true.
his-
But why does it matter that we know that he left with Abraham?
Because doesn't tarnish Abraham with Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes, and Lot is also leaving behind the idolatrous world of Haran. And one of the things we're going to see if we, I don't know if we'll read Sodom and Gomorrah, but if you look at the Sodom and Gomorrah story, Lot is the one who is saved, along with
Lot
his
was
daughters
saved, right,
and his
right.
wife, although she doesn't make it very far.
Does Lot have his wife at this point?
No.
No, it sounds like
it's just
he's by
Lot.
himself.
Because he's
But
Yeah.
Lot is one of the people who is willing to go on this Lech Lecha journey with Abraham to go to this new place and leave behind his world of idolatry.
It's kind of interesting that Abraham's brother was Haran in the town with or where they were staying. It's
Yeah.
also Haran.
And Haran is interesting because it's the center of an ancient civilization called Ebla.
Yeah, so if you go to the back to the maps in the Chumash, it's the map that says on it the Near East in the times of the prophets. I mean, if that where keep the other way.
Which
No,
one?
other way.
Which one?
Move the pages from right to left. There you go.
Shows the
Oh,
whole
you
Middle
passed it.
East.
You passed it.
It shows Turkey and
Okay.
Arabia.
Turkey.
It's the opposite of where it says the Jerusalem in the Old City.
okay.
Okay, so if you look where Jerusalem is, okay, and if you look where it says Beth Eden, it's just to the left of Nineveh.
Here.
Beth Eden, just above Beth Eden is Haran. Okay, and if you look over to the right where it says Babylonia, you'll see the town of Ur.
Yeah.
Abraham was from the town of Ur Kasdim, or Ur of the Chaldeans. And he left from Ur and he went to Haran. And he will eventually make his way back down. Alright, but Canaan or Canaan, if you go to the first map where it says the land of Canaan from Abraham to Moses, you will see that what we would call modern day Israel is Canaan in that map. The priests have an agenda. They want you to know that in Abraham being called by God, he's going to the promised land. This is not just some journey. He's going to fulfill what will become the covenant. So the priests insert their authorship into this text. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to show you. Let's keep going. Now we got to the famine. We're back in our Humashim. We're on page 72 in the red Humashim. We're on page 51 in the Sources Revealed book. Sandy, you're reading. Whenever you're ready, back to the famine.
Okay. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to reside there because the famine was heavy in the land. And it was when he was close to coming to Egypt, and he said to Sarai, his wife, "Here I know that you're a beautiful woman, and it will be when the Egyptians see you that they'll say, 'This is his wife,' and they'll kill me and keep you alive. Say you're my sister, so it will be good for me on your account, and I'll stay alive because of you." And it was as Abram came to Egypt, and the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. And Pharaoh's officers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And he was good to Abram on her account. And he had a flock and oxen and he-asses and servants and maids and she-asses and camels. And Yahweh plagued Pharaoh and his house, big plagues, over the matter of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you've done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She's my sister'? So I took her for a wife for myself. And now here's your wife. Take her and go."
Okay, so they go to Egypt, there's a famine, and on their way down, Abraham says, "Honey, I just want you to know you're really good looking, and something might happen along the way, and so let's just pretend, for argument's sake, that you're my sister." By the way, there is reason to believe that they are half-brother and sister. Okay, we can prove that elsewhere in the Torah, but that's not germane for our conversation. And it was not an uncommon thing for this to happen. why would a husband want to play his wife off as his sister?
Okay, we got some rewards for it.
He could get some rewards for it, and
Well, if somebody wanted her and she was married,
Yep.
they'd get rid of the husband.
good. They might get rid of the husband. What do we know about Abraham's relationship to God at this point in the story? Not much. All we know is that Adonai has said to Abraham, Lech lecha.
Oh,
He finally arrives at the place we're supposed to get to, only to realize there's a famine, so he goes down to Egypt. And while he's in Egypt, he takes matters into his own hands. It's not like God is redirecting the story. That's an important key, because we're going to look at a comparison in just a second, and we're going to see that there's something different that happens. Finally, they get to Egypt. Pharaoh sees how beautiful she is, brings her into his palace, and because of her, everything goes great with Abraham. By the way, one can make the argument that if you were looking for a moment in Abraham's life where his relationship starts to sour with it, this is the moment. Okay? Everything from here on out is downhill. And at the very end, Abraham gets all of this wealth, and then it says that God punishes, in particular, Adonai punishes Pharaoh with plagues. And Pharaoh says to him, what did you do to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so I took her as my wife? Now here is your wife, take her and be gone. There seems to be an implication that not only did he take her, but he actually slept with her.
And it's her fault that his kingdom is getting
That is
expanded.
correct.
Where does it talk about the
Always
plague?
the fault. What is
On
the
page
fault?
74, verse 17. Say again?
I'm surprised Pharaoh didn't kill him because he
Page
lied to
51
Pharaoh.
on
That is correct.
That-
Why doesn't Pharaoh kill him? Why is he afraid?
It's the plague.
Because of Adonai.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, not only is Abram in this space, but Abram's God is in this space. And Abram's God is more powerful than Pharaoh's God. What were you saying?
Pharaoh, the interesting thing is that Pharaoh recognizes this without having a dream or anything, as far as we know.
Yes.
Unless it's Midrash.
Well, no, it seems to be in the text.
Yeah, but we don't know why he knows, how he knows.
Right, exactly.
What I find intriguing is, it may be as far as Pharaoh's concerned, rhetorical questioning, but he normally, he'd want an answer.
Yep,
Why did you do this? And there's no answer.
yep. No answer.
If God was protecting Abraham, then why did he let Abraham hand her off to the Pharaoh?
That's a great question. God doesn't really seem to play a role. I use the specific word. Adonai doesn't really seem to play a role other than saying to Abraham, go.
He sets it up.
Right? Once Abraham then takes matters into his own hands, goes down to Egypt, doesn't do anything, and then once Abraham gets himself into trouble, gets himself into trouble, God intervenes. Adonai intervenes. It's interesting also to note that Adonai, at this point in the story, is in a relationship with Abram.
Mm-hmm.
There is no covenant yet.
There's no.
If there's a covenant, his name has to be
Abraham.
Abraham. Okay.
Except, God has said, I'll bless you and make you a great nation.
What'd you say?
This to me is an example where Abram doesn't necessarily trust Adonai.
Good. There's no mutuality, there's no trust yet between Abraham and God. Abraham doesn't know what God is capable of. God doesn't know what Abraham is made of. All we know...
Maybe that's why he just set him out on his own. Go, and then he just wanted to observe, see what
That is correct.
So then why didn't he stop?
Yes.
He said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will
Or curse those who curse you. So does God keep up with God's end of the bargain? That's right. So on the one hand, you could make the argument that this is a story where God, Adonai, is building trust with Abraham. Abraham has to figure things out, but don't worry, Abraham, I have your back. Even if you don't know it yet, I'm going to curse those who curse you.
So that's what, he set up Abraham to give his wife to Pharaoh for that reason.
Could be. And by the way, right, it could be that, yeah. But look also at verse 16, though. We can make an argument from this story that not only does Abraham's relationship with Sarah change, or Avram's with Sarai, but something else happens while he's in Egypt, and because of her, it went well with Abram. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves. Who is the operative female slave that we want to know about? Hagar. All of the future stories of Abraham's life begin in his relationship with Adonai, his going to Egypt, pawning his wife off as his sister, getting Hagar. She's not named here.
Oh, wait a minute, though. Hagar belongs to Sarah, and she might have come into the relationship as part of Sarah's household.
Well, she's not named, but we know that she somehow most likely comes out of Egypt from here in this story, because the next time that we go to Egypt with Avimelech, Hagar is already in the story. Okay?
You keep saying story.
Yes. As opposed to? Narrative? The Torah?
Well, as opposed to reality, any semblance to.
So you bring up an interesting question, which is how should we talk about the Torah? Should we talk about the Torah as a work of nonfiction? Should we talk about the Torah as a work of fiction, as a work of literature, as a work of history? I had a Bible professor in 5th grade, Mrs. Catch, who said you shouldn't read the Bible as a history book.
But rather,
It's a great question, and she was an Orthodox teacher, right? Don't read it as verbatim history, but maybe it's about morals and lessons and metaphors and whatever. On the other hand,
That's a basic principle,
That's right.
actually, that the Bible is not told in narrative sequence. It's
Correct.
chronological sequence.
correct. There's not a chronology in the Torah, but maybe it should be. That's one of the challenges we have with Torah interpretation, is that people like to say, well, when did Abraham live? Right, as if to somehow associate him in a historical context.
Except now so much is being backed up about what's in the Bible, isn't it?
Right. Well, most of it's in the cloud anyway.
Not in Genesis.
Oh.
The funny thing is, the problem is the question. People didn't think about things in the way you asked your question. At the time that this happened, history and family stories and tales of how things worked, it was all one big bucket. Now we see things differently, and we break it up like we have a history.
history wasn't invented yet.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right.
This is the closest.
Yeah.
Maybe not looking at the Torah as a history book
Right.
lends itself to more of the individual interpreting the story.
Right.
Because if it's a history book, it's facts.
That's correct.
And that's the only way you can look at it.
Yeah, and that's one of the I think the saving graces of the text, is that we're not supposed to look at it as history or necessarily say that each of these people. I mean, Friedman does an interesting thing in the earlier part of the book where he talks about who wrote the Torah. Is it Moses who's writing it? Is it someone after Moses is writing it? How could Moses be writing it if we don't know where Moses died? Or how can Moses even be writing about his death? All of those kinds of things. But did Moses even exist? We say Moses was the humblest person who ever lived, and he's writing thousands of years ago. How is that possible? Right? Or is it someone who's reflecting back on it, that this could be a model of what humility would look like? So yeah, I would actually argue not to read it as a history book. I think it creates more challenges if you read it that way. But as a book of morals and metaphors and stories and analogies and whatever else. Yeah. Bob.
One of the footnotes points out that he says his wealth included camels.
Yes.
There weren't any camels in Egypt.
There were not domesticated camels in Egypt at that period of time. That is correct. The famous camel conundrum.
Do you know of anybody who has reoriented the story into a chronology?
There's Seder Olam.
Probably.
Yeah.
What?
There's Seder Olam in the Orthodox Bible. There's a book called
Yeah,
The
there's-
Order of the Universe.
Yeah.
The Christians do this.
Yeah, there are
They
books.
did everything.
Every
Yeah.
day.
Well, they believe it as that.
And by the way, you can go to the back of books and see chronologies of kings and all of these other things in events. Yeah. Karen?
But if this is to be read as a book of morals, I'm having a real problem not liking very much because
You're not the only one.
because here is this man who turns over his wife, and what it emphasizes in here is all the goodies he got as a result, and it became the foundation of family wealth and all of that. And I mean, where was this? I mean, in no way is he kind of punished unless you weed in some of the stuff maybe that happens
So
later.
Karen, if you want, for 5 years, I can give you a rabbinic degree, and you can try to do exactly that.
Why did Sarai object? You know,
Why didn't she?
Yeah, why
That's a
did
great
she?
question.
I mean, it's
Sarai-
she went along with it.
Right. So we have to. I want to tease out for 1 second. If we want to study this in terms of trying to answer your question, Karen, or Jerry's question, and make sense out of it, we're in the wrong class. Okay? We're trying to look at how the story was put together, not to evaluate or to judge the characters. If you would like to do that, you're welcome to have a Devar Torah on Shabbat morning, and I'm happy to let you. On the flip side, and I mean this with sincerity, you actually cannot evaluate the characters by only looking at the story alone. I'll say it a different way. You can't look at the binding of Isaac's story or the story of the banishment of Ishmael and Hagar without reading this story. You have to read the beginning of the story and the middle of the story and the end of the story before you can actually make a clear... By the way, Sarah does get the short end of the stick here, but later on you can make the argument that she abuses Hagar. Right? Or that she's not so nice to Abraham. Now, maybe is it a consequence of this early behavior? Totally. But for those of you who like psychology, you could read this as a family system. Family, yeah. Hold on, Andy.
To me, it's like layers of generations.
Absolutely.
And generations and generations.
Correct. Yeah.
Somebody
Absolutely.
kept a
Fine.
10-page thing, and they used it and made it the way they wanted it.
Right.
So, are you going to, do you want to compare this to what happens in chapter 20?
Yes.
Okay.
If we have time.
Your pardon?
If we have time. Okay, so let's turn to chapter 20, page 109, or in your other books, page 61. One of the things that you should know is that there's actually a third Abraham, or a third story in Egypt, and it has to do with Isaac and Rebekah, and also with Abimelech. The first story and the third story are both written from the authors of J, and the second story, which is the one we're going to look at now, is from the author of E. And it's possible that the first and the third stories were written to really build one on the other, and it makes sense that way because of the authorship, and that this one is actually trying to promote something different. So this is a story where Abraham and Sarah once again go down to the region of the Negev, between Kadesh and Shur. And while sojourning in Gerar, Abraham said to Sarah, they're going to hang out with Abimelech again, or the king of Gerar. Gerar is just outside of Egypt. And they're going to say, in verse 2, she is my sister. All right? Bob, will you read? Starting in verse 2. We can start in verse 1 if you want.
And Abraham traveled from there to the Negev country. And he lived between Kadesh and Shur and resided in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, she's my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. And God came to Abimelech in a night dream and said to him, here, you are dead over the woman whom you took, for she's a man's wife. And Abimelech had not come close to her, and he said, my lord, will you kill a virtuous nation as well? Didn't he say to me, she's my sister? And she too said, he's my brother. I did this in my heart's innocence, and in my hands cleanness.
You going?
And God said to him in the dream, I too knew that you did this in your heart's innocence, and I too held you back from sinning against me. On account of this, I didn't let you touch her. And now, give the man's wife back, because he's a prophet, and he'll pray for you, and live. And if you don't give back, know that you will die, you and all that you have. And Abimelech got up in the morning, and called to all the servants, and spoke all these things in their ears, and the people were very afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? And how did I sin against you, that you brought a big sin over me and over my kingdom? You've done things with me that are not done. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you see that you did this thing? And Abraham said, because I said, there just isn't the fear of God in this place, and they'll kill me on account of my wife. And also she is, in fact, my sister, my father's daughter, but not by my mother's daughter, And she became a wife to me. And it was when God had me roam from my father's house, and I said to her, this will be your kindness that you'll do with me. To every place where we come, say about me, he's my brother. And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and servants and maids, and he gave them to Abraham, and he gave Sarah, his wife, back to him. And Abimelech said, here's my land in front of you. Live wherever it's good in your eyes. And to Sarah he said, here, I've given 1,000 weights of silver to your brother. Here, it's a covering of eyes for you with everyone with you, and you're justified with everyone. And Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids, and they gave birth. Because Adonai had held back every womb of Abimelech's house on account of Sarah, Abraham's wife.
Okay. So this time we don't have a famine story in the same way. They don't go to Egypt. They're more in the Negev region of Israel.
Another thing, that era, all of them had 10 wives.
They had multiple wives, yes. I don't know if they had 10. But they did, yes, they did have multiple wives.
So,
But Abraham, to our knowledge, Abraham only has one.
And Isaac only has one.
What?
Isaac.
And Isaac only has one. It's not until Jacob. And by the way, Jacob only wanted one.
Right.
No, Abraham later says he has two. Four.
Yes, but not in the original part of the story, right? We get other gleanings of women in his lives like Hagar and Keturah, and it's not clear if Hagar and Keturah are the same person, and there's other, yes, there are other mentionings of it.
His genealogy is about 24 different
Correct.
ethnic groups that all spawned from
Correct.
Abraham.
All right, so this story, what do you notice about the name of God? Adonai, well in this case it's Elohim. Okay, in this case this is an E story. Now, Lou made a comment before, usually when you expect God to intervene in some way, you would think that God might intervene in a dream. I think it was you who said that.
No,
It was not.
But
Who said it? Somebody said it. Stan, did you say it? Okay, somebody said it. And in this case, in the middle of the night, while Sarah is with Abimelech, he encounters God. And in this case, it's not God Adonai, but it's God Elohim. And God said to him in a dream, I knew that you did this, God came to Abimelech in a dream, I'm in verse 3, you are to die because of the woman that you have taken, for she is a married woman. And he says, O Lord, will you slay people even though innocent? Who knew? And in this case, the word for Lord is Adonai, but it's not Yud He Vav He. It's like Adonai, like master. Okay?
But in this one, he spells it as Yud He Vav He.
He does?
Yes.
No.
Look at 17. Look at line 17.
No, we're not in 17.
No,
we're in,
three. Two
we're
or
in
three.
verse 4.
4, yeah. And he uses my Lord.
Yeah.
My Lord, not,
Okay,
not Lord.
4.
Yeah, my
Okay,
Lord.
up
Capital
there.
L.
Which
Yeah.
is synonymous with master.
Master, correct. Okay? So now not only do we have God speaking to Abimelech threatening to kill him, but we have a dialogue between them. Now why might you think that Elohim would be used here and create a dialogue with Abimelech?
Because Abimelech's God.
It's the God of El.
Yeah.
It's not God, it's not Abimelech, it's not Abraham's God, it's Abimelech's God. Okay? And he says, she is not my sister. So he said to himself, he himself said to me, she is not my sister. She also said, he is my brother. When I did this, my heart was blameless and my hands were clean. I didn't do this on purpose. And God said to him in the dream, I knew that you did this with a blameless heart, and so I kept you from sinning against me. That was why I did not let you touch her. So who takes the credit? God, Elohim. Elohim intercedes. He says, I didn't do it on purpose. That's why I stopped you, says God. No problem. Therefore, restore the man's wife, since he is a prophet. He will intercede for you to save your life. So what's the purpose of this story from an authorship perspective? Why is this story here?
Really changes the characters, the personalities, and the involvement
Mhm.
of, I mean, you know, it seems like Abraham comes out looking better than he did in the first story.
Yep.
And it also includes Sarah, which the other hint as being part of it. This is my brother. I knew that.
Right.
I think there was something. So I think it changes the characters.
Okay.
personalities a bit.
Okay?
Also, there's the Elohim, and later it's the Yahweh, the Yud-Heh-Vah-Heh in the last,
Where?
at the end of this one.
Yeah.
That's what it is. At least in this.
Verse 17.
Verse 17.
Oh yes, we'll
18.
we'll get to verse 18 in a second.
So is it kind of saying that because Elohim interceded here to protect Abimelech, because Elohim couldn't protect him against the wrath of Yahweh?
Could be.
So there is a hierarchy of gods that
Could be.
is being hinted at.
Right, and that's not an uncommon thing. We do think about in the ancient world there was something that was called monolatry, meaning that you had multiple gods, but there was one god that was superior to the others. Okay? Yeah? As opposed to monotheism, which is just one god.
It's rare, it seems to me in the Torah, for God to speak to, let's say, a non-Jew, a non-Israelite.
It does happen, right? But it's not so common, but it does happen. Bilam is a good example of it. But in this case, the story of Sarah and Abimelech is really a story about Abimelech and Abimelech's God Elohim, as opposed to a story about Abraham and Adonai. And in the previous story, when Adonai comes into the scene, does Adonai talk to Pharaoh? No, he just afflicts him. He just curses him. There's actually no dialogue whatsoever. So it's an interesting shift in terms of who is describing the story, who's writing the story. And then at the very end of the story, you have, as some of you correctly noted, right? Abraham prays to God, and God heals Abimelech. Who does Abraham pray to? Nope, look at verse 17.
Adonai.
Nope.
Oh, God.
Vayitpalel Abraham el ha-Elohim. Okay, and one of the things that we have here that's an interesting play is that it's not just Elohim, but it's ha-Elohim, the God, which could be a way of elevating it. It could be a way of distinguishing between regular El and the Elohim that we're usually referring to in the story. But the last verse, 18, seems to be a little bit bizarre. Ki atzor atzar Adonai be'ad kol rechem leveit Avimelech al davar Sarah eshet Abraham. For the Lord, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, closed fast every womb of the household of Avimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. What's bizarre about this verse?
We didn't have any pre-knowledge of this was going on.
Nope.
They just stuck in there.
They
to show
just
the
stuck
power
it in
of
there.
Adonai.
That's right. This is probably a power play. But you'll notice, according to Friedman, who authored the last verse? You would expect it to shift to J, but it's actually an E.
It's still the E.
Why? Why do you think this is? Come on, Phil.
Well, is it because of the other story, the connection with the other story?
Maybe. That's one
I
possibility.
would have thought it would have been P.
It could be P. It could be, I think Ellen is probably right, that it is a way of connecting the two other stories of the husband and wife being pawned off a sister and the J narrative. Because the third story, which we are not going to read, is J. So it is possibly a continuity piece, or it's an example of monolatry.
I have another answer. That there are no punctuation marks in read 21.
Yes, I was going to get to that last.
What was that?
Okay. One can make the argument, remember, there's no chapter or verses in this. So let's say, for example, that we finish the chapter as follows. Abraham then prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his slave girls so that they bore children. Period. End of chapter. New chapter. For the Lord had closed fast every womb of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. The Lord therefore took note of Sarah, as he had promised the Lord, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken, and Sarah conceived and bore a son. This is the chapter that we read on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, where Isaac is born. There's a likelihood that the end of chapter 20 is linked directly to the beginning of chapter 21. And that all of a sudden, the only one who can cause a womb to reopen and become fertile is Adonai. And so, Phil's right. Most likely the last verse in chapter 20, verse 18, is a link between the two narratives. It would make sense to end the previous one with this whole thing about the Lord closing the wombs, because all of a sudden, the children of Avimelech can have kids again. But who do we want to attribute that power to? Adonai, not to Elohim. Yeah.
Question of timing. When did Abimelech close? When did Adonai close the wombs?
Doesn't say. It's not in there.
It's not in there.
Mhm.
When? Because he was there just one night,
It
right?
just, yeah.
Right away, just nothing happened.
Now, okay, so let's go deeper. Were you going to make a comment?
Yeah, I was curious, the story of the three men who come to visit Abraham
Yeah.
and predict
Yeah.
the Annunciation,
Uh-huh.
so to speak. Which tradition is that?
Take a look. Go back to chapter 18. I'll give you a hint. The opening is Vayera Adonai.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
All right. Now, there's one other point, Ripu, which could explain your comment. One of the things that happens with Avimelech when he's about to sleep with Sarah, right, is that it could be that in that moment, God responded by closing her womb and everyone else's womb to make sure that if he did sleep with her, she wouldn't get pregnant. And so now at the end of the story, you have to undo that. But don't worry, Elohim comes right at the last minute, right in the nick of time, stops Avimelech from doing anything. Avimelech says, I could do it, I wasn't going to, whatever. No problem, so God reopens the wombs. And then it becomes a segue into the next chapter.
And then she gets pregnant.
And then she gets pregnant. That's exactly right. Presumably, though, by Abraham. Not by that. No, but it's important. If you don't, all right, Audrey, it's important because if you don't say what you say at the end of that chapter, you might think that she's having Avimelech's baby. She could have had Pharaoh's baby, but so this is an interesting question. If you really want to get to fertility issues, if she did sleep with Pharaoh in the previous J narrative and doesn't get pregnant, and presumably she slept with Abraham and doesn't get pregnant, then, Abraham. So Pharaoh, Abraham, then you could make the argument, that she's the one who's infertile.
Well, no, actually, maybe she got fertile with Abimelech, and maybe it was Abraham's sperm.
But we know it's not Abraham because Abraham has a child with Hagar.
Not yet.
No, it's already happened.
Okay, well, Abraham is now 75, so maybe
He's 90.
here he's
No. We've mixed the stories.
So these are two separate incidents where
Now
he
he's
passes his wife off as his sister?
There are two separate
That's
incidents.
right, because he.
Right? This is the doublet.
Yeah.
Right? We have two stories where Abraham takes Sarah and makes her his sister, and she is about to engage in some act with another person. In one case she does, in another case she doesn't, and there's different outcomes, and in each story there's two different names of God.
So it's not the same story with different.
No.
It's two
different,
different stories are told by
Now, it
separate
sounds like
people,
he's holding
right?
his wife and making a lot of money
So
in
it
the
could be the
process.
same.
And in this story, he
can buy an Aston
acknowledges
Martin.
that she's his half-sister.
That is correct. So we could then ask the question to Karen's point before, to Jerry's point before, what's the need for the second story? Why do we need to tell the same thing twice?
Where we charge it.
We don't have to answer that now, but we will try to start answering those questions as we read more of these doublets. Because we're going to
But
see
in
this
this
a
case,
lot.
it is not the same story, like we have seen.
No, it's not an identical story, but it's peculiar that we have two scenarios where Abraham... I'll give you an example, Ripu. Most people tend to learn from their mistakes. Okay? Why wouldn't Abraham have figured out that telling the leader of a community that his wife was his sister was a bad idea after the first
It takes a
one?
while.
It wasn't a bad.
Because he's a husband.
He made a lot of money in it.
It turned out
He was
to
a
be very-
businessman, is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
It
I
turned out
see.
to be
Okay.
very
That
bad.
is high
And he saw Sarah as an asset.
businessman.
So this was the
Who could
original
get the most
Forbes
money
book,
from
you know?
there? And then Isaac does the same thing, right?
Isaac does the same thing,
With
but it's not
Avimelech.
with Avimelech. But interestingly, if you read the Avimelech story with Isaac and Rebecca, it's in J language.
I read too much. The girl.
And it's not God who intercedes in that case, it's
Hold up on that sheet.
sees
That's correct.
Isaac fondling his wife. And surmises that.
In which case, Stan, you can make the argument that Isaac learned from Abraham's lesson.